This time, I don't think that's going to happen because this crisis is going to be punctuated by a dollar crisis, by a sovereign debt crisis. And when that happens, nobody is going to take refuge in the dollar when they're trying to get out of the dollar.
In today's video, Peter Schiff, founder, CEO and global strategist of Euro-Pacific Capital, gives a warning that the 2008 crisis was just the prelude to a larger sovereign debt crisis in the United States that may lead to a collapse of the US dollar.
Real interest rates are going to be even lower than they were before because inflation is going to be even higher. But the problem is going to be the ability to just pay the nominal rates. Because even if the real rates are going down, if you don't have the money to cover the increasing nominal rates, then it doesn't even matter. But what's going to matter, though, is going to be the impact on prices, because ultimately falling real interest rates are going to be bearish for the dollar, and that's going to put more upward pressure on prices. So it's the reverse of what happened during the last easing cycle, where the Fed was able to print a lot of money with QE, yet the dollar gained value on foreign markets relative to other currencies. And so even though we were debasing the dollar was gaining relative to other currencies, and that was maintaining its international purchasing power, and that was keeping down the cost of a lot of our imports. And so we really weren't having to deal with the full consequences of the inflation because the strengthening dollar, despite that inflation, was offsetting it. But now it's going to be the reverse. We're going to have a weakening dollar. It's going to be like 2002 to 2008. During that time frame, the dollar went way down. The dollar index went from 120 down to 70. That's when gold went from 300 to 1,000. That's when gold stocks did much better than tech stocks. That's the environment that I think we're in, except on a bigger scale, because the U.S. is starting this cycle in much worse financial shape than it was in 2000. We had a much bigger bubble. The Fed has a much bigger balance sheet. There's been much more damage done to the underlying structure of the economy. And so now I think the moves in the dollar, in gold, are going to be much bigger. And the other main difference is going to be the end game. Because paradoxically, the dollar's decline and gold's rally came to an end in 2008 with the financial crisis. And that paradoxically caused the oversold dollar to bounce. And it caused investors to take profits in gold. This time, I don't think that's going to happen because this crisis is going to be punctuated by a dollar crisis, by a sovereign debt crisis. And when that happens, nobody is going to take refuge in the dollar when they're trying to get out of the dollar. And no one is going to take refuge in U.S. Treasuries if they want to get out of the dollar, because U.S. Treasuries are denominated in dollars. So a dollar crisis will look much different than a financial crisis, and the impact will be far different in the financial markets, in the foreign exchange, and precious metals. And all this, I think, is happening. I think it's going to be happening at an accelerated pace. So a lot of people, they did okay in Q1. They made some money in these tech stocks. They made money even in bonds, rallied a bit. But don't be lulled into a false sense of security. If you stay on that path, you are not going to make money. In fact, you could lose a tremendous amount of money. What's even worse, it's not just losing money, it's losing purchasing power. Because even if you don't lose your money is going to lose its purchasing power. So what you got to do is, again, read between the lines and the writing on the wall and change your portfolio. Foreign stocks, again, beat the U.S. stock market. They didn't beat the NASDAQ, but, they beat the Dow, beat the S&P. So the foreign markets are already doing better. But I think that they'll do even better in the later quarters of the year, particularly in the back half of the year relative to the U.S. market, when the dollar really starts to fall. And that gives a big tailwind to the non-dollar portfolio, and in particular, the gold and precious metals. I want to talk a little bit about politics, because on Friday, we also found out that a grand jury in New York indicted former President Donald Trump, who is a current candidate for the presidency. And so now he's been indicted. He hasn't been arraigned yet. And we haven't actually seen the indictment because they haven't unsealed it. But we know that the indictment relates to violations of campaign finance laws. And it has something to do with $120,000 or $130,000 payment that was made to Stormy Daniels to keep her mouth shut. Remember, Stormy was out there talking about some affair that she allegedly had with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump didn't want her talking about it anymore. Maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But he paid her to be quiet, which is pretty common. You know, a lot of people enter into these confidentiality agreements where you pay somebody money to keep their mouth shut and they don't talk about something. I mean, this happens. I mean, I've never been involved in something like this, but I know that it happens, certainly with people that have are a celebrity or people know who they are. It's very easy for somebody to come out and make an accusation. Maybe it's true, maybe it's false. But sometimes the easiest thing you can do is pay the person to be quiet because, maybe that's the best way to deal with it, especially if you're wealthy. I mean, people talk about, oh, this is $120,000. That's a lot of money. Not to Donald Trump, right? That's not a lot of money. So it was probably worth what he paid. Now, what they're trying to claim, though, is because he was a candidate for president at the time, that this payment constitutes a campaign donation. And he should have reported it, which to me seems ridiculous because how do you report it? Number one, because if the purpose of the $120,000 is so Stormy Daniels doesn't make these allegations, but you have to report it on something that's disclosed to the public. If you report that you paid Stormy Daniels $120,000 to not say anything, you've just destroyed the entire value of what you were buying for the $120,000. So it would actually make it impossible if you had to report it as a campaign contribution, because then why even do it? Because the fact that you made the payment would be news in and of itself, and you basically would look guilty because you paid. So I don't even see how he could have reported it, even if he thought it was a campaign donation, which he clearly did not, because he has a right to do that as a private citizen. Just because he's running for president doesn't mean you can't enter into a confidentiality agreement with somebody. I mean, you could do that for personal reasons. The guy's a married man. The guy's got kids. He doesn't want this person talking about something that may or may not have happened. He may have made that payment even if he wasn't running for president. But there certainly were valid reasons for Donald Trump to believe that that didn't constitute a campaign contribution that should have been disclosed. And in fact, the federal, campaign finance people, they knew about it for years. They never filed any charges. Now you got this ridiculous DA in Manhattan coming out and saying, oh, he violated campaign finance law. Well, why didn't the federal government say something about it? Because it's a federal law. It's not a state law. If he violated these federal election laws, why didn't the federal government do anything about it? I mean, I know firsthand about this because I was fined and I paid a $10,000 fine. I think it was $10,000. May have been 20. I don't know for sure, but I think it was 10. But I got fined for violating campaign finance laws. Nobody indicted me. I didn't face criminal charges. I paid a fine. It's civil. So even if Donald Trump should have reported this $120,000 payment, and I don't think he should have. I think he was right not to do it. But even if I'm wrong, right, what the hell do I know, right? I'm not a career politician. That's one of the reasons I don't like campaign finance laws. It was the worst part about my Senate campaign was filing these campaign finance laws. They are written by career politicians to prevent guys like me from running for office, right? They make it harder for people to raise money when they're not a career politician, and especially when you're a self-funder. Right, I didn't fund all of my campaign myself. I did about a third of it. I know Donald Trump, spent a lot of money of his own money on his campaign, and these campaign finance laws really make it difficult. But they also make it impossible if you have wealthy friends for them to contribute because of all these limits. I mean, I don't think there should even be these campaign finance laws. Personally, I think they're unconstitutional, and I think we just get rid of them. And just I think they do more harm than good. I think they protect the entrenched political class, and it's one of the reasons that there's no turnover. They've stacked the deck. They've rigged it against challengers, especially non-career politicians who just want to run like I did, these campaign finance laws are very difficult. And of course, they're hard to understand, which is why I inadvertently violated them. And, I can't even remember what exactly I did to get this $10,000 fine. But I got it and I paid it. But, it was just an honest mistake. But that's the same thing that Trump would have done, right? Because if I was Donald Trump and I had to make that payment, even if I made it through my organization, it never would have occurred to me that I was making a campaign contribution when I entered into that arrangement, right? Who would have thought that? Donald Trump did it through a lawyer. I don't think his lawyer said, hey, you got to report this as a campaign contribution, right? So maybe they were wrong. Maybe Trump got bad legal advice and he inadvertently should have reported this donation, right, that he made, because he's the one that wrote the check, right? It's not Stormy Daniels' donation. She didn't donate anything. Now, maybe if she had agreed to be quiet and didn't take a payment, would that have been a donation? Would her agreeing not to say something bad, would there be some monetary value you would have to ascribe to that and then claim it as a campaign donation from Stormy Daniels? But it certainly wasn't a donation of hers because she got paid to do it, right? She didn't donate anything. She got paid something. So if anything, it was an extra donation from Trump. Now he committed or he contributed lots of money to his campaign. So what's an extra $120,000? I mean, it's nothing. What would have been damaging if he had to disclose the nature of that contribution, if that's what it was, because it would have blown, the whole thing up, because now everybody would have seen that he made the payment. And then what's the point of making the payment, right? If you got to tell everybody that you did it. But my point is that even if he was mistaken and it should have been reported, this is civil. This isn't a criminal. They're concocting a crime and they made it a felony, right? So this whole prosecution, in my mind, is illegal. It is politically driven. What about equal protection under the law? Why is Donald Trump being treated differently than so many other politicians who have made the same mistake, myself included, right? If they weren't going to charge me with a crime, they shouldn't be charging Donald Trump with a crime. He didn't do anything worse than I did, even though I don't even remember what I did. But I'm sure if Donald Trump had done what I did, they could have indicted him for that too, right? But it is not a crime. It's a mistake. If anything, it's a civil penalty. What are they doing? They're hoping that they can embarrass him. They can prevent Donald Trump from running for office. It doesn't even matter. Even if he's sitting in jail, he could run from office from jail. And then I guess once he got elected, he could pardon himself and he would get out of jail. But the whole thing is ridiculous that you would try to put him in jail for something like this. And of course, if he was convicted of this felony, that doesn't stop him from running for president. You can be a convicted felon and run for president, right? My dad ran for president, in the Libertarian Party. He didn't get the nomination. Harry Brown got it, but he was an ex-con. He was in for tax evasion, but he could still run for president. And if he had won, which obviously he wasn't going to, but supposedly he could win, right? I mean, whatever. He could serve. The only thing he couldn't do was vote for himself. He used to joke about that. He can run, but he can't vote for himself. And so if Donald Trump were actually convicted of a felony, he couldn't vote for himself for president, but he could run for president. I'm in that same position right now. Not that I'm an ex-felon, but I live in Puerto Rico. And because I live in Puerto Rico, I'm not allowed to vote for president. But I can run for president from Puerto Rico. I could become president as a Puerto Rican resident. I just can't vote for myself, nor can my wife, because she also lives here in Connecticut. So the same situation would apply even if they were able to get a conviction because they find some jury of Trump haters. I mean, imagine that. How is Trump going to find a jury in New York, right? All these guys are like, looking for some excuse to arrest them. And this is the crazy part about it. All the things that they wanted to arrest Trump for, right, that they said he did. And this is it. This is all they could come up with. This campaign donation, that's all the district attorney in New York could find on Trump was a campaign finance violation. That shows they've got nothing. Because if they had something better, they would have gone with that instead of this. But this whole thing makes a mockery of the judicial system. And think about all the crime that's actually going on in New York. You think that the prosecutors could focus on real criminals instead of campaign finance violations, which aren't even any of their business. If there's federal laws, that against this, right? They can come at, and they didn't want to do it because they know that he didn't do anything wrong. But this guy, I guess he's got some political ambitions. This district attorney. Oh, let me indict Donald Trump. But it really, to me, undermines the entire judicial process. It's another just piece to show how politicized the justice system has become in the United States. That we don't really have justice. That we're not really a nation of laws the way we're supposed to be. We're a nation of men, and these men apply the laws differently depending on the circumstances.